Some family arguments start over money. This one started over a motel receipt, and it did not end well for anyone involved. My name doesn't matter here, but my mother's does, because she's the one who started calling me a monster in front of the entire extended family group chat. Let me back up and give you the full picture, because there's a lot of history that made this blow up the way it did. My younger sister Paige is 2 years younger than me. We grew up close, genuinely close, not the fake kind of sibling closeness people perform for family photos. She was the one who covered for me when I snuck out in high school, and I was the one who drove 3 hours to help her move dorm rooms in college without complaining once. I say all that so you understand this isn't a story about siblings who never liked each other. It's a story about how much harder it is to set a boundary with someone you actually love. Paige has been evicted 3 times in 5 years. Not because of job loss, not because of a medical crisis, not because of anything sympathetic, because she consistently doesn't pay rent on time, picks fights with landlords over things that don't matter, and burns through roommates faster than anyone I've ever met. The first eviction I understood. She was young, she'd had a rough breakup, she made bad decisions for a few months and paid for it. I helped her get back on her feet without a second thought. The second eviction, 2 years later, I started to notice a pattern, but I still helped, because that's what you do for family, right? I covered her security deposit on the new place. I paid off a car repair so she could keep her job. At one point I gave her what I told myself was a loan, $4,000 that was never once repaid, and that I eventually just stopped mentioning because bringing it up always turned into a fight about how I was keeping score on family. I make good money, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I worked hard for it, put myself through a difficult program, took a job that meant long hours for years before it paid off, but I also got lucky with timing in my industry, and I know that too. My mother has never let me forget the lucky part though. Every single family gathering, every holiday dinner, every random Tuesday phone call eventually turned into some version of the same lecture. You have so much, and your sister has so little, and family takes care of family. I heard that sentence so many times over the years I could probably recite it in my sleep. Third eviction happened 2 months ago. Paige called me not asking, just informing me that she'd be staying in a motel for a week or two until she found something new and that I should send her the money for it. Not could you help, not I'm in a tough spot, just an assumption stated flatly, like I was a line item in her budget she'd already accounted for. I asked what happened with her security deposit from the last place, since that money should have come back to her when she moved out and could have covered at least part of a motel stay. She got defensive immediately, said it wasn't relevant, said the landlord was being petty about some damage that definitely wasn't her fault, and then told me I was being cheap for even asking. That was the moment something in me just shifted. I told her calmly that I wasn't going to pay for the motel. I told her I still wanted to help, but differently. I offered to help her find a caseworker or a nonprofit that specializes in housing transitions. I offered to sit down with her and actually build a real budget for the first time in her adult life. I even offered to co-sign a lease if she committed to a concrete plan with actual accountability built in. She didn't want any of that. She wanted cash, no conditions, same as always. She hung up on me mid-sentence. Here's where it gets loud, guys. When the mom finds out, this stops being a sibling issue and becomes a full family production. Within an hour, my mother called me and I could hear in her voice that Paige had already gotten to her first with her version of events. My mother was sobbing, actual sobbing, the kind that used to work on me when I was a kid and doesn't anymore, though it still stings every time. She said she never thought her own son would turn his back on family. She said blood means something, that money isn't supposed to matter more than a sister's safety, that I should be ashamed of myself for making Paige beg for something so basic as a place to sleep. I tried to explain the offer I'd actually made, the case worker, the budget, the co-sign lease, but my mother talked over me every time, circling back to the same 3 or 4 accusatory lines like she was reading from a script. Eventually, I just went quiet and let her finish because I could tell nothing I said was actually landing. What I didn't know at the time was that she was recording the call. I found this out about an hour later, when screenshots of a summary of our conversation, paraphrased in the most damning way imaginable, stripped of any context about the offer I'd made, got posted into a family group chat with 20-something people in it. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. An aunt who I'm pretty sure doesn't even have my current phone number. All of them suddenly weighing in on a private family disagreement they knew almost nothing about, based entirely on my mother's version. The post painted me as this cold, wealthy son who let his own sister sleep on the street rather than part with pocket change. Paige notably was staying in a motel, a real one, with a bed and a lock on the door, eventually paid for by our aunt, not sleeping in a doorway somewhere, but nuance has never once been the point of a family group chat pylon. I watched the messages roll in for about 20 minutes. A cousin I met maybe 4 times in my entire life commented something like, "Wow, must be nice to have that much money and still say no to your own sister." Someone else dropped a crying emoji under my mother's post like it was a eulogy. I sat there with my phone in my hand, feeling something I can only describe as a very specific kind of family-shaped rage. I didn't respond in the group chat. I've never been someone who does public family fights, and I wasn't going to start with an audience of relatives who hadn't sent me a birthday text in 3 years. Instead, I did something my mother clearly did not expect. I sat down that same night and pulled every single financial transaction I had sent Paige over the past decade: bank transfer records, Venmo history, an old check I'd photographed years ago for my own records, the works. I put it all into one simple document. No commentary, no dramatic framing, just dates, amounts, and a one-line description of what each payment was for. When I added it all up, it came to just over $38,000. I sent it privately to my mother first, not the group chat, with a single line attached. "Before this goes any further, I want you to see the actual numbers because I don't think you have." My mother didn't respond for 2 full days. I genuinely didn't know what to expect when she finally did. What I got wasn't an apology. It was a demand that I take the group chat post down, which was almost funny, considering I never posted anything in the first place she had. I reminded her, again privately and calmly, that I hadn't made a single post, and that if she wanted this handled quietly, she was the one who needed to walk it back publicly, since she's the one who put it out there. And I want to pause here because I think this is the moment that decides how the whole rest of the story goes. Some people would have caved, Op didn't. She never posted a correction in the group chat. To this day, as far as I know, most of those cousins still think I'm the villain of that story. And honestly, at some point I made peace with the fact that I can't control what 20 people I barely talk to believe about me. What I could control was what happened next. And what happened next is that neither my mother nor Paige has asked me for a single dollar since. Not because the relationship magically healed, it hasn't, not really, but because I think, for the first time in a decade, they both understood I actually knew the real numbers and they no longer had the narrative advantage they'd always relied on. Family group chats are undefeated at turning a private disagreement into a public trial, and I love that Op had the receipts, literally, ready to go the same night. The extended family mostly moved on within a couple of weeks, the way group chats always do once a new piece of drama shows up to replace the old one. Paige eventually found a place with a friend from work, and to her credit has stayed there longer than any place she's lived in years. My mother and I are civil now, not close, careful with each other in a way we never used to have to be. I still send birthday gifts, still show up to holidays, still play the part when I need to. But I have not and I will not be funding another eviction, and for the first time in a long time, saying that out loud doesn't feel like betrayal. It just feels like the truth. This next one isn't really a revenge story. It's more of a here's exactly how a marriage ends story, but I think you'll want to hear how it played out anyway. My husband Ryan and I have been married for 11 years. 2 kids, a mortgage, a golden retriever, the whole picture that looks fine from the outside if you're only looking at our holiday card. About 4 months ago, I found out he'd been seeing someone, a coworker named Ashley, for close to a year. I want to be clear that discovering the affair wasn't even the worst part of this story. I know that sounds impossible, but what came after was so much worse that the affair itself almost feels like a footnote now. I found out the way a lot of people do. A notification popped up on a shared tablet we use for the kids' schedule from an app I didn't recognize, and it unraveled from there in about 48 hours. Messages going back nearly a year. Hotel receipts. A birthday message from her that referenced an inside joke I didn't understand, dated back to a work trip he told me was just him and 2 other coworkers. After I found out, we went through a rough 2 weeks of him swearing it was over, that it had been a horrible mistake, that he'd already blocked her number. I later learned that wasn't entirely true, but at the time I believed him because I wanted to. We started marriage counseling almost immediately. It was uncomfortable and slow, but things felt, if not good, at least survivable. I genuinely thought we were rebuilding something. Then one evening, after the kids were asleep and the dishwasher was running and everything felt almost normal, Ryan sat me down at the kitchen table and told me he needed to talk to me about something sensitive. My stomach dropped immediately because in 11 years of marriage that phrase had never once preceded good news. I assumed at worst that he was finally going to admit the affair hadn't actually ended the way he claimed. I was not prepared for what he actually said. He told me Ashley wanted a baby, that she was 38 and felt her window was closing, that this had become something she brought up constantly, and that he, sitting across from me at our kitchen table in the house we bought together, wanted to ask me, his wife, for permission to father a child with her. His exact reasoning, and I remember this word for word because I have replayed it in my head more times than I can count since: it wouldn't change anything with us or the kids we already have. It would just be a separate thing. I need you to understand the audacity of asking your wife for signed permission to have a baby with the woman he was cheating with, framed like a business proposal where nothing changes for the actual family. Guys, I had to reread this part of the story twice. I didn't scream. I want to be honest, I think I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving kind of laugh, because for a second I genuinely thought he was building up to some kind of joke, or a strange hypothetical from a podcast he'd listened to. When I realized he was completely serious, I didn't cry either, not in front of him. I told him I needed to think, got up from the table, and spent the night in the guest room with the door locked, staring at the ceiling. What I actually did that night, once I was sure he was asleep, was call a close friend of mine who happens to be a divorce attorney and ask her, hypothetically at first and then not so hypothetically, what a scenario like this would look like for custody, assets, and timeline if I decided to file. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She also didn't seem surprised, which somehow made me feel less crazy. The next morning, over coffee neither of us drank, I told Ryan I wasn't giving him permission for anything, but that I also wasn't interested in staying married to a man who thought that conversation was a reasonable one to have with his wife of 11 years. He tried to backpedal almost immediately, said he shouldn't have framed it that way, as if the framing was the actual problem and not the plan itself, not the year-long affair underneath it, not the fact that he'd apparently already discussed timelines with Ashley before ever mentioning it to me. I filed 2 weeks later. I didn't rush it, but I also didn't second-guess it once the decision was made. Word got out fast, the way it always does in a town where everyone's kids go to the same 3 schools, and Ashley's own family found out about the pregnancy plan before it had even happened. It turned out she hadn't fully disclosed to her own parents that the timeline she was pushing for involved a still-married man with 2 kids at home. That relationship between Ashley and her family reportedly did not survive the fallout either, though I only know that secondhand, filtered through a mutual friend who felt I deserved to know. He wanted a permission slip for infidelity and got a custody agreement instead. That's not even revenge, that's just cause and effect, but I have to respect how calm Op stayed through something this unhinged. The divorce took about 8 months to finalize, longer than I expected, mostly because Ryan kept trying to renegotiate small things that didn't actually matter. I think just to feel like he had some control over a situation he'd started and couldn't undo. I have primary custody of the kids. Ryan sees them on a standard schedule, every other weekend and one weeknight, and to his credit he has shown up consistently for that part, even if he couldn't show up for the marriage. I don't know if he and Ashley ever did have that baby. I heard again secondhand that things between them cooled off significantly once the divorce dragged on longer than either of them expected, and once her own family made their disapproval clear. But honestly, I've stopped needing to know. It's not my business anymore, which is, I think, the most freeing sentence I've said out loud in over a year. The kids are adjusting better than I expected, in the way kids often do when the adults around them stop pretending everything is fine. My daughter asked me a few months ago if Dad and I were still a team, and I told her that we're still a team when it comes to her and her brother, just not the kind of team we used to be, and that felt like an honest thing to tell an 8-year-old. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay most days, which surprised me more than anything else in this whole story. I've learned that it wouldn't change anything is one of the most dishonest sentences a person can say to someone they claim to love, and I've learned that sometimes the most dramatic-sounding decision, walking away from an 11-year marriage over a single conversation, is actually the most obvious one, once you strip away all the reasons you'd been telling yourself to stay. Last story of the day, guys, and this one involves a wedding dress, a secret backup bride, and a woman who found out exactly what she was worth about 18 hours before she was supposed to say, "I do." I was supposed to marry Colin 2 weeks ago. I want to start there because everything else in this story only makes sense once you know the wedding didn't happen, not because of cold feet, not because of a fight over seating charts, but because of what I found in my future mother-in-law's email inbox, completely by accident, the night before the ceremony. Quick background, Colin's mother, Patricia, never liked me, not in a subtle way in a makes comments about my job, my family, my choice of venue way, for the entire 2 years we were engaged. Little digs at every dinner, comments about how she'd always pictured Colin with someone a bit more established. She wanted Colin to marry a woman named Whitney, the daughter of one of her closest friends from the country club, someone from the right kind of family, her words, relayed to me secondhand more than once by Colin's sister, who has always been kind to me and I'll say now tried to warn me in her own quiet way more than once. I brushed it off for most of the engagement. Every family has an opinionated relative, I told myself. I genuinely believed Colin loved me enough that it wouldn't matter what his mother thought, and to be fair to him, he did stand up for me on the small stuff. When she criticized the venue, when she pushed for a different guest list, he pushed back. I didn't realize the small stuff was covering for something much bigger happening underneath. My wedding dress cost $14,000. I want to be honest, that's an absurd amount of money for a dress, and under normal circumstances I would never have spent that, but it was a designer gown that Patricia herself insisted on paying for as a wedding gift, and she pushed hard, almost aggressively, for one very specific designer with a very specific silhouette. At the time I thought it was generosity, maybe even a peace offering after 2 years of tension. I thought maybe she was finally coming around. I was wrong, and I mean spectacularly wrong. The night before the wedding, I was at Colin's parents' house going over final logistics with the florist and the caterer, and Patricia asked me to grab her phone charger from her home office so she could charge her phone for the next day. It was a small, ordinary request, the kind you don't think twice about. Her laptop was open on the desk, email already pulled up on the screen, and I wasn't trying to snoop, genuinely wasn't, but a subject line caught my eye before I could look away. Whitney, backup timeline, confirmed by Friday. And guys, this is the part where I would have stopped breathing too. I know I shouldn't have read it. I read it anyway, standing there in that office with the charger still in my hand, my heart going somewhere it had never gone before in my life. It was an email thread between Patricia and Whitney's mother, going back almost 3 months, discussing a contingency plan in which Whitney would be on standby, dress and all, in case Colin came to his senses before or even during the wedding. There were logistical details about a dress Whitney had already been fitted for the same designer, a near-identical silhouette to mine, ordered around the exact same time Patricia had insisted on mine, down to the same fitting windows. There was a line from Patricia that I will never forget as long as I live. 14,000 for a dress she'll only wear once is a small price if it buys us the right ending. I read that email 4 times. I remember counting, actually, like some part of my brain thought if I read it enough times it might change into something less awful. It didn't. I put the charger down, walked back out to the kitchen like nothing had happened, smiled through the rest of the evening, and drove home in complete silence. I didn't confront Patricia that night. I know some people will think that was a mistake, that I should have blown everything up right then, but I didn't sleep at all, and somewhere around 4 in the morning I made a decision that I know some people will judge me for, but I don't regret it, not for 1 second. I let the wedding proceed exactly on schedule, all the way up until the ceremony itself. Guests seated, 200 of them, string quartet playing something soft as people found their seats. Colin standing at the altar in his tux, looking, I'll admit, genuinely happy, genuinely unaware. I walked down the aisle exactly the way we'd rehearsed it. I even smiled because some part of me still needed to see this through to its actual end, on my own terms, not Patricia's. When the officiant asked, as officiants do, whether anyone present objected to this union, I raised my own hand. I stood in front of 200 guests, Colin's entire extended family, my own parents, coworkers, college friends, all of it, and I read the email out loud, word for word, including the line about the $14,000 dress buying the right ending. My voice shook for the first sentence and then somehow steadied completely. I looked directly at Patricia while I did it, seated in the front row in a pale blue dress she'd clearly chosen very carefully. Then I turned to Colin and asked him in front of everyone whether he had known about any of it. His face told me everything before he even opened his mouth to try to lie about it. Reading the email out loud at the altar in front of 200 people is easily one of the boldest things I've ever heard an op do, and I am fully, completely on board with it. I left the venue in my dress, walking straight back up the aisle I'd just come down, past 200 people who had gone completely silent. I didn't go back for the reception, obviously, since there wasn't one anymore. Colin has reached out multiple times since, texts, one long voicemail, and email through a mutual friend insisting he had no idea about the backup plan, which I genuinely believe may be true, actually. But it doesn't change the fact that he grew up with a mother who thought that was an acceptable thing to arrange behind both of our backs, and he never once in 2 full years together warned me she was capable of something like that, even after all the smaller signs. Patricia hasn't spoken to me since, which I consider honestly a mercy. Whitney, from what I understand through the same mutual friend network that seems to know everything, was mortified to find out she'd been kept as a literal backup bride the entire time, dress fitted and everything, and has reportedly not spoken to Patricia either. Apparently that friendship between the two families has cooled significantly, which I can't say I feel bad about. I kept the dress. I honestly don't fully know why. Maybe as a reminder that $14,000 can buy you a beautiful gown, but it can't buy you loyalty, and it definitely can't buy you an ending you actually deserve. It's still in the garment bag in my closet. I look at it sometimes, not with sadness anymore, mostly just with a strange kind of gratitude that I found out exactly who these people were the night before, instead of 5 years and 2 kids into a marriage.